Okay, we are now live on YouTube. Facebook was not allowing us. I don't know what the reason is, but we're live on YouTube now. Uh,
Okay, ma'am.
I think we can. Okay, we are now live on YouTube. Facebook was not allowing us. I don't know what the reason is, but we're. Christy, I think we can start.
Sure, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar. Let me take a while to introduce Ms. Diksha Bhattacharya, who's the speaker for today. We are very excited to welcome Ms. Diksha Bhattacharya to our webinar. Diksha is a clinical psychologist who brings a rich mix of academic expertise and hands-on experience to her work in the field of mental health. She currently works as a faculty in the Department of Psychology at Christ University and is also a part of the team at Summit Psych Services, where she provides psychological support and therapy to individuals across different age groups. She holds both an MSc and an MPhil in clinical psychology and is registered with the Rehabilitation Council of India. Diksha is deeply committed to ethical and evidence based practice. Her work spans a range of areas, including child and adolescent mental health, trauma informed therapy, and supporting individuals with emotional and behavioral challenges. Whether in the classroom, the therapy room, or through her outreach work, Diksha brings warmth and compassion to everything she does. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Ms. Diksha Bhattacharya. We are so glad to have you with us today, Diksha. And before we begin, I would like to tell all the participants if you have any questions or doubts, please feel free to drop it in the chat option below, and we'll take it up towards the end of the session. Thank you.
Shall I start it?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, Christy, for that introduction. And welcome all. Good evening. Thank you for joining us for this session. I am Diksha, and we will be talking about understanding emotional dysregulation in childhood disorders. Can I get a feedback if I am audible to all? Just a thumbs up would be helpful.
Yes.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Okay, now starting with emotional dysregulation. Before we go into the topic, let's talk about something very important and something that we all experience as human beings, which is emotions. Now, what are basically emotions? Emotions are complex responses or psychological and physiological reactions to events or situations which experiences there. It can involve feelings, behavioral response, or physical changes such as increased heart rate when we are feeling excited. Emotions basically influences how we react to an environment. It facilitates how we process information. It helps us understand situations, act accordingly, and navigate challenges. So emotions are not just experiences, plays a very significant role, or you can say a function in how we process the world around us. It provides us with information, it helps us process that information, motivate us to take an action regarding that information, and also protect us at several situations. So, in briefly, we can say that it helps us understand situations, act accordingly, and navigate the challenges given by these situations. So, what we can say is that emotions can also be seen as our primary signal system that help us react to an environment and caters to our safety and fulfilling needs by influencing our decision making, learning, and making sure that we engage in goal directed behavior. Now, I am sure that all of us experience emotions. We are familiar with emotions, but it's important to understand how we experience these emotions. So let's take a minute to, maybe share amongst each other that the emotion that we are most familiar with and how we experience it in our mind and body. So if I have to talk about myself, right now. I can say that the emotion that I am feeling right now is you know a little bit of worry because I'm feeling nervous regarding the presentation I'm giving right now in front of so many of you. And how I'm feeling it in my body, maybe my hands are feeling a little cold and my heart rate is a little elevated. So this is how we know identify emotion and how we experience emotions. So can I hear from the audience as well regarding this? You can maybe switch on your camera, or if you feel comfortable you can put it on your in our chat box as well. I don't have access to the chat box. If anybody has put anything, can you please read it out?
Nothing yet, Diksha. I'll let you know.
Okay. Emotions can be difficult to identify, and that is why most of the times that is one of the difficult experience we tend to have face most challenges with. That is why I urge everyone to talk about what kind of emotions that we tend to experience and how do we experience it in our mind and body.
I think a common emotion that we see or feel is anger. Uh, Experience in the mind would be having angry thoughts that why did this happen or why is it like so. And experience in the body would be uh, like a heaviness in the chest, a lot of energy, physicality, energy.
That's really interesting, and it's really good that how you are able to verbalize it, and it's really important. That is one of the most important factor about emotions. Think some of them have shared on the chat box. We experience all these emotions at some point or another. Anxious at times, having, yeah, okay. Fear, anger, sweating. Sweating is one of the common experiences how we experience it in our body. Thank you all for sharing this. One second. Yeah. So, one of the things that I wanted to highlight here is that when we talk about emotions, we mainly talk about the main primary emotions, such as here also Riddhi has mentioned anger. We have anger, fear from several other people. But most times we don't realize that apart from the primary emotions, within the primary emotions, actually, there are several different emotions which play a role in our life, such as happy emotions can be divided into grateful, excited, hopeful, confident, playful, while mad can look like jealous, defended, annoyed, frustrated, and each emotion manifests in different way. So as adults, we find it difficult to identify these emotions. So it's very important to see that children might children will also find it equally difficult, or more difficult, because their way of identifying the emotions or being able to verbalize these emotions is not as matured as adults. So now this brings us to a very important question, which is why are emotions so important, and why do we have to learn about them? One of the main factor is mind-body connection. Now, research studies have shown that there is a very strong connection between mind and our body. Most time you must have noticed that when you are not feeling well, or if you have a fever, generally we tend to feel a little upset. We don't feel motivated as enough, or we don't feel happy, or we feel a little under the weather.
Sudah,
So
Nimba,
our physical
Batanon.
So our physical health is primarily affecting our mood, right? So research has found that our mind and body is interacting with each other frequently, and because of which this happens. So when our physical health is down, we tend to experience it in our mind as well. Similarly, when what we experience emotionally also affects our physical health. Suppose if we are not feeling well, or if we are not going through emotional distress for a long period of time, we tend to have headaches, gut issues, or aches in different parts of the body, or sometimes people also manifest different kind of physical symptoms as well. So research has shown that long-term dysregulation and distress can also impact our important cognitive functions such as thinking, decision making, attention, etc. So this happens because emotions are not only related to how we feel, but are regulated by very important areas of the brain. And brain areas, these brain areas are also very important in regulating emotions as well. So this can be understood from the key brain areas related to emotion and thinking and how they interact with each other. So let's first talk about the first brain area, which is amygdala. Now, if you can see the green small almond-shaped part of the brain, which is called amygdala, and for simplicity purpose, we can call it the emotional brain. So it is responsible for emotions, particularly fear, pleasure, and acts as an emotional alarm system, such as when our brain perceives a threat. This system tells us to either fight for our life or run away from that situation. It also helps us in regulating emotions, or telling us how to respond to a particular situation. Next is our prefrontal cortex, which is in the frontal area of the brain, and we can call it the thinking brain. It is essential for our cognitive control, and so the prefrontal cortex plays a different role in our executive functioning, such as thinking, decision making, planning, our working memory, etc. And along with that, emotional regulation is also an important factor of important function of prefrontal cortex. It helps in managing the responses that the amygdala provides when they are dealing with a certain situation or a stressful situation. So when does this emotional dysregulation or emotional crisis occur? Let's look at our brain. What happens to our brain when there is an emotional crisis? So there is a concept called amygdala hijack. Now, please remember, amygdala is our emotional brain, which is mainly responsible for uh, emotion responses. So ideally, when there is an information from the environment, sensory information from the environment, this green area takes it in, that is the information processing area, the thalamus, sends it to the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex processes that information, sees whether it's a threatful message or a message, basically logically processes it, and then sends it to amygdala for an emotional response. Now, when there is an emotional or amygdala hijack, it can lead to an emotional crisis because the information from thalamus does not always go to the prefrontal cortex and goes like an alarm system to the amygdala. So in this case, the amygdala does not have the information from the prefrontal cortex, which says that yes, this is a safe situation, or no, this is not a safe situation, or this is how you should be reacting. So the prefrontal cortex here is not actively uh, regulating the functions of amygdala. So here the amygdala overrides the prefrontal cortex and becomes hyperactive. And in these cases, emotional reactions may seem disproportionate and very difficult to control or regulate. And that is when an emotional crisis may take place. So now let's come to the topic that of our day, which is emotional dysregulation. So before we start with the concept, let's look at this case. I urge everyone to read these cases, and if you feel like you have children who with whom you face this difficulty with emotions, or if you are able to find anything from this case which feels familiar, if you're able to identify behaviors in this case which you feel can become a little difficult to manage, please let me know on the chat box, or you can switch on your mic as well and talk about it. Just go through the case and try to identify which behavior feels a little difficult to deal with. Yes, you can please put your answers on your chat on the chat box, or you can switch on your mic as well.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, my son is struggling to sit for studying.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not able to make him to sit for study.
All right.
Yeah, I'm finding that very difficult to sit him to study.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for sharing that. Uh,
Yeah.
Is there anything that you find here in the case that you feel like it are difficult as well?
If I tell him for more than 5 times, 6 times to sit and study, he'll get little angry. That's it.
Hmm.
Other than that, he'll not do all these things. He'll get angry and he will just go inside and close the door.
Okay. Right. So going inside and closing the door, after that, how long does it take for him to come out?
No, not much time, ma'am.
Okay.
Within few minutes, he'll come back and he will again apologize for sorry, I'll sit and be like that. Within 5 minutes, 6 minutes, he'll be back.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. We'll definitely come back to you. You know, it's really important. It's going to be a good example that you shared this. Let's look at the case for now. So, yeah. So now in the case, we see that the child is a 10-year-old boy who loves to, invent stories, and he's energetic boy. But there are certain difficulties that the parents face with him, is that whenever there is homework that it can become a struggle for him, such as he might find it difficult problem to solve, or he might yell, slam his book, throw pencil across the room. And there are different experiences also which the parents find it difficult to handle, such as difficulty in calming him down, uh, temper tantrums, etc. So these are the primary examples of emotionally dysregulated behavior. So let's look at what emotional dysregulation is by the terms of definition. So emotional dysregulation is the difficulty or inability to effectively manage or respond to emotional experiences in an appropriate way. Meaning that children may feel like that the situation that they are faced with, they don't have enough resources to deal with it, and they are not able to regulate their emotions that are getting triggered by that situation, and it because of which they might show certain dysregulated behavior. It means that the child's brain struggles to regulate the intensity, duration, and expression of these emotions, causing emotions to feel overwhelming, louder, or out of control. Meaning that, suppose ma'am has mentioned that her child finds it difficult to sit with his homework or his to study, and after telling him or reminding him several times, he tends to become angry, gets inside the room. So this tells him that when the child becomes frustrated or angry, they find it difficult to manage it in a way such as talking about it, or saying something, manage it at that point, because of which the child withdraws, goes inside the room, and takes a time out. So this is a sign where the child is finding it difficult to regulate the emotion. Now, does this mean that the child is having this emotional dysregulation? Most probably not, because one of the sign of emotional regulation is being able to come back to the baseline. Now, let's look at what emotional regulation is first before we go deep into emotional dysregulation. So, emotional regulation is one's capacity to recognize, analyze, change, and regulate emotions in order to achieve adaptive functioning, such as, calm responses, ability to express feelings verbally, engage in goal-directed behavior, being able to control one's impulsive behavior, and most importantly, returning to baseline after experiencing an upsetting situation. Now, the fact that ma'am's child comes out of the room and apologizes, says that I'm sorry that I got angry, or I'm sorry I did not sit for studying, this shows that the child had the capacity to come back to the baseline. So when we say baseline here, we primarily mean that right now, suppose when we are feeling neutral, that is our baseline. When we feel a little aroused, when we start to feel experience emotions which are making us a little overwhelmed, you can say that we are a little above our baseline. Being able to control these emotions, regulate these emotions, navigate through these emotions, and engage in behavior, goal directed or adaptive behavior, because to navigate the emotions and coming back to the baseline is called emotional regulation. Now, this can be a very challenging factor for several kids, because of which emotional dysregulation may take place. So, in children, this can look like, so emotional dysregulation in children can look like intense mood swings, frequent temper tantrums such as screaming, shouting, crying, making excessive demands, throwing things around, irritability, or difficulty coming down after becoming upset. Now, emotional dysregulation is not just having strong feelings, it is when these feelings are hard to control, interfere with daily functioning, relationships, and learning, especially with school learning, relationship with other peers, siblings, etc. Now, when we're talking about emotional dysregulation in children, it is very important to realize that children are not being bad, or the children is not doing it. The child is not doing it on purpose. It is mostly their inability to deal with, or not having enough resources, or feeling like they do not have enough resources to deal with the situation, which overwhelms them, and because of which this happens. So this is what it explains. The children do not understand how and when to use effective strategies. When strategies are not used flexibly, or strategies fail or are overused. So emotional regulation patterns may interfere with one's ability to achieve their goals when the strategies fail, and that's when emotional dysregulation may take place. Emotional dysregulation may manifest in different ways. One of them is emotional manifestations, meaning it shows emotionally, such as having mood swings, irritability, heightened anxiety levels, anger, disproportionate anger, such as the situation is just not getting their regular seat at the dining table. And because of that, the child throws away the food and shows a very disproportionate anger because of that. So that is when the emotion is not proportionate to the situation, we can say that the emotion is disproportionate, and that is very commonly found in emotional dysregulation. That is in fact one of the hallmark of emotional dysregulation. Next is cognitive manifestation, meaning how it affects our cognitive processes. It can lead to impaired attention, difficulty with important cognitive functions such as planning and decision making, and distorted ways of thinking, such as feeling like, this is very common in certain teenagers, feeling like they are things are constantly being unfair to them, or they are constantly being picked on. The situations, negative situations becomes very magnified. That is when we can say that it is leading to a cognitive distortion. And last one is behavioral manifestation, meaning that because of these emotional and cognitive experiences, how do this emotional dysregulation shows up in the child? It can be temper tantrums, aggression, withdrawal, such as going into a room, isolating themselves, struggling with self-soothing, meaning not being able to come back to the baseline, and the dysregulated episode lasting for a quite long time. Sudden anger outburst and excessive crying. So these manifestations makes it very difficult to interact with their world, meaning that schoolwork, homework, or interacting with peers, teachers, relationships, becomes a it makes it very difficult for them to engage in this their daily activities. Now, it's important to understand that emotional dysregulation does not take place just because the child is not feeling comfortable, or it does not happen out of the blue. There are certain triggers or certain emotions which triggers the child, because of which they might show dysregulated behavior. So it is important to identify and recognize the emotions in children in order to help them through this process. So the triggers can be specific situations or feelings that overwhelm the child and lead to emotional outburst. And when we as parents or caregivers understand these triggers, it helps us create a safe environment for them, plan strategies to reduce these triggers, and teach the child how to manage their own emotions, identify and manage their own emotions. So, in triggers may look like, the first one is internal triggers, which are feelings and physical states inside the child, such as feeling hungry. Now, hunger may look like a very simple thing, but it can become a trigger for a child with difficulty with communication. Suppose the child has autism spectrum disorder, the child's communication might be impaired. In such cases, hunger is hunger, feeling discomfort in the body, feeling pain or tiredness can lead to a dysregulated or dysregulation of emotion. Anxiety, fear, anger, negative thoughts, these are all internal triggers that the child may experience. We can look at the picture what different negative thoughts can look like. Feeling hurt, feeling like something is unfair, feeling embarrassed, feeling observed in a crowded space are all examples of internal triggers. Next, we'll talk about external triggers, which are happening outside the child's body, which is basically stimulus from the environment or when they interact with the environment. This can be anything: mild change in the routine, conflict with peers, siblings, parents, teachers, etc. Uncomfortable environment such as loud noise, very bright light, etc., or demands that exceed the child's ability. Now, the child who is a simple change in routine, such as having to stay awake few hours later than their bedtime for an child with autism, might become an external trigger for them. So it is not about how big or how small the situation is. It is mostly about how the situation is affecting the child. One of the very important kind of trigger which we need to remember are sensory triggers, which is basically how the information is processed by our sensory organs. Auditory triggers can look like loud noises, high pitched noises such as alarms, a dog barking very loudly, visuals. So this can become a trigger for the child when they are outside, or visual triggers like bright light, flickering lights, a strong smell, tactile triggers such as wearing and very uncomfortable cloth material, etc. So in sensory triggers, what happens is that they feel very overwhelmed, or what we call is that sensory overwhelm or sensory overload. And because of that, they are not able to deal with the situation, and they feel at loss of resources to deal with these sensory triggers, and it can lead to emotional dysregulated behavior. Yes. One of the factors that we experience when we are talking about neurodivergent kids, when these triggers are maximum, are meltdowns. So emotional dysregulated behavior, which is temper tantrum, throwing anger, having anger outburst, screaming, shouting, can also are also commonly called meltdowns. And it's very common when we are dealing with children such as with ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, etc. Now, why is it important for us to regulate these triggers, or why is it important for us to identify these triggers and make sure that the child is comfortable? One of the very important reason is that if the trigger keeps happening, it can lead to an emotional dysregulation cycle, meaning that the child falls into a cycle where they are not able to come out of it. If you look at the picture, it is quite self-explanatory, where they experience a trigger, then the brain's amygdala, if you remember, we talked about the emotional brain becomes hyperactive, leading to intense emotions. And this leads to a dysregulated response such as anger, withdrawal, excessive crying, etc., and leading to difficulty in calming down the child. And eventually, if this trigger is not managed, the trigger keeps repeating, and the cycle also keeps repeating, making it very exhausting for the child as well as for the parent or the primary caregiver. Now the question arises, are these triggers always as distressing for the child? Probably not, because there is a concept of window of tolerance which is very important for us to know. Now this is true for even adults as well. You must have experienced that during some point in the day things feel good, and we feel like, yes, whatever the stress is, whatever the work is, we will be able to get done with it. And the same thing when we are presented with at a different time of the day, we feel very frustrated and annoyed. We can easily, it can easily tip off our temper, etc. So that is what window of tolerance is, the time when you feel, capable enough to deal with stress. So if you look at it at the top of the picture, it says hyperarousal, and the bottom says hypoarousal. Hyperarousal state is when the person is already feeling a little, edgy, scared, and they might easily have an anger outburst, difficulty concentrating, self irritability, and hyperarousal where they are feeling a little low, like there might not be an intense anger outburst, but even though there is a challenge, they might not feel motivated enough to deal with it. So children will also have this window of tolerance, and window or a period of distolerance, where they might not, where triggers might be most triggering, I would say, at some point of the day, and in other time when they are in that period of time where they are feeling good, it might not trigger them that way. So you might feel that, okay, my child is mostly happy after taking a afternoon nap till the evening. The child is energetic, happy, not feeling as distressed, but the same thing before the nap is the child is cranky. So you can say that the time after the nap till evening is the child's window of tolerance, and that is exactly what we work with when we are dealing with emotional regulation techniques. So understanding this helps the parent to recognize when their child may need support to remain within this emotional safety zone. Meaning that you might know that if in this time my child is cranky, I will have to regulate the triggers and make sure the child feels comfortable. And in the time when the child is in their tolerant period, you can work with increasing that window. So the idea is to enhance or increase that window period of tolerance through different strategies. All right. So this is what emotional dysregulation is. Now, emotional dysregulation can look different across different disorders. So it is not a standalone disorder or a symptom that we see in one disorder, but rather we can say that it's a cluster of syndrome or that manifests differently across different disorders. Now, some children may show very internalizing symptoms due to stressful situations, such as, staying inside the room, isolating themselves, crying within themselves, or not verbalizing their difficulties, low in motivation in doing things, etc. And other children may show very evident externalizing behavior where the child might feel overstimulated and they may show intense anger, tantrums, throwing things, screaming, shouting, defensive behavior, hyperactivity, not being able to sit in one place, running around, difficulty focusing, etc. So let's look at how it manifests in different disorders. So the disorders which are commonly associated with emotional dysregulation are mood disorders, ADHD, anxiety disorders, and autism spectrum disorder. So we will be talking about ADHD first. One of the very important component of ADHD, apart from attention deficit and hyperactivity, is impulsivity. Now, when faced with a difficult situation and if the child is experiencing something emotionally triggering, because of their impulsivity, it prevents them from controlling their emotions. It leads to a rapid, intense emotional reactions, and they are unable to control their reactions to the situations or mood swings, because of which their reactions may appear to be disproportionate to the situation. Secondly, because of their attentional issues, the child may find it difficult to shift their attention from a negative emotional situation or a memory. Now, one of the example that we can give for an attentional issue because of which emotional dysregulation can occur is, suppose the teacher has in classroom, the teacher has said something to the child. So one example from my client would be, the child was in the class and he is in the regular habit of taking attendance in the class. Now in one class, the teacher said no and asked him to go back and sit down. Now, the child was unable to shift the attention away from that specific situation, and after some time, he started screaming in the class. So, this is one of the component of or characteristic feature of ADHD, because of which emotional dysregulation can take place. So these are certain signs of emotional dysregulation in ADHD, such as emotional sensitivity, difficulty in self-regulating their primary emotional responses. So if they're feeling angry, their impulse to throw things might be very strong as compared to someone who probably has mood disorder. Then problems refocusing attention away from strong emotions, just how we just discussed. Difficulty regulating other secondary emotions as well. The next disorder is social communication. The next disorder that we'll talk about is autism, emotional dysregulation in autism. So in autism, one of the common symptom is social communication challenges, which means that children find it very difficult to interpret social cues and respond appropriately. So they are not able to understand, or they are not able to interpret other people's communication, because, and at the same time struggle to recognize and understand their own emotions clearly as well. This limited emotional awareness and difficulty with emotional language makes them difficult to identify when they are upset, leading to delayed or ineffective reactions or ineffective regulations. This can lead to behaviors such as tantrums, meltdown, aggression, withdrawal, etc. So in this case, the child find it very difficult to understand what is happening to them in social situations. When suppose they are in a crowded space, they are not able to say that, okay, I'm feeling crowded, I'm feeling suffocated, because of their difficulty with language. And that is why emotional dysregulated behavior can become a way of communication for children with autism. Sensory triggers or sensory factors, we have already discussed how overstimulating environment can become a factor for emotional dysregulation in children with autism, and being not able to self-regulate is one of the contributing factor which can prolong this dysregulated reactions. Another factor is rigid thinking pattern. So it is a common symptom of children with autism where they exhibit very rigid thinking pattern, and adapting to changes makes it very challenging for them. So any change in their routine, maybe a change in bath time, can make it, make them feel like, okay, this is a threat situation, this is a challenge for me, and I don't have enough resources to deal with it, because adaptability is not very strong for them. And because of that, distress may increase, and emotional dysregulation can become very significant or very evident in these children. So these are certain emotional dysregulation symptoms in children with autism. The common symptoms are intense emotional reaction, difficulty returning to a calm state, challenges in expressing emotions verbally, having meltdowns that we just spoke about, or sometimes shutdown also, where the child completely refuses to interact or provide any responses, emotional outburst. Now, there are certain atypical symptoms which we do not necessarily see in other children with this emotional regulation who are not having autism. So, it can look like change in appetite, over silly behavior, uncontrollable laughter, sudden defiance, speaking very fast, or making certain noises which are not very common. So these are also few atypical symptoms of emotional dysregulation in children with autism, which might say that the child is probably having a overwhelming emotional experience or might not be able to deal with their current situation. Emotional dysregulation is also common in emotional disorders. In anxiety disorder, the child, we might find children in a state of hypervigilance or constant in a fight and flight mode. So in such situations, any perceived threat can easily trigger an emotional reaction. So suppose a child with separation anxiety may become extremely distressed, clingy, or have tantrums when they anticipate separation from a caregiver or left alone for a period of time. In mood disorders, the emotional dysregulation is generally one of the hallmark of these disorders like depression, attachment disorders, etc. So the a manifestation may not be like throwing tantrums or aggression. It mostly looks like prolonged sadness, excessive worry, mood instability, and it involves difficulty returning to emotional baseline after distress, leading to persistent negative feelings. So this is about how emotional dysregulation may manifest in different disorders in our when we are talking about childhood disorders. Now coming to the last component of the presentation are causes, contributing factors, and interventions. So let's briefly look at what could be the contributing factors, and we will mostly be looking at it from the perspective of what can be our role as a caregiver. So we have already spoken about the neurobiological cause, which is the our thinking and the emotional brain and how it interacts with one another. The next is inconsistent parenting. So, in socio-environmental influences, sensory processing challenges, exposure to trauma, etc. Let's look at what socio-environmental causes can look like, such as stressful home environment, schools challenges that can lead to, exacerbating the emotional dysregulation in children. External pressures from this context negatively influences children's emotional health, indicating the need for support and intervention. So distressing home environments such as constant bickering or parents not being supportive enough can be a contributing or a very significant factor. Trauma such as childhood trauma, maybe physical or sexual trauma during childhood, can be an profoundly impactful factor which can disrupt emotional regulation in children. And as an adult, if it is not intervened, it can stay or it can lead to adult emotional dysregulation as well. So, intervention strategies will include parent management techniques, de escalation skills, self regulation skills, and communication techniques, which we can manage from our side. Definitely, if the emotional dysregulation is challenge in dealing with a child, it is important that we seek for professional help. But here we will talk about how a parent or a caregiver can use certain skills. One of the component of parent management technique is the importance of consistent parenting. So if we are dealing with children with neurodivergence, consistency, or even typically developing children as well, consistent parenting is very important, which provides them with a stable environment and predictability. So when the child is able to predict what is going to happen next, then their feeling of not having enough resources to deal with the situation minimizes, due to which they are able to regulate their emotions better. So talking about them, if you're going out, letting them know that okay, we will be going out on a bus, it might be crowded, and this is where we will get down, and this is how long it is going to take. Telling them, giving them a brief about what is going to happen, and letting them know what to expect can help them regulate their emotions, and also not feel like they will not be able to cope with that situation. Parents can work on having predictable routines and environment to reduce emotions, modeling calm behavior and appropriate emotional responses, such as making sure that we as parents or caregivers do not have extreme emotional reactions in front of them when we are facing with a stressful scenario. Employing positive reinforcement and having alternative behavior, such as telling the child that, if you are hungry, you can just show, maybe have a chart of food and show that this is what you want, want chart. And having a positive reinforcement technique for it, that like giving them a chocolate for it or what they enjoy during the day. So teaching them alternative behavior and having a factor to reinforce that alternative behavior is very important, because most times what happens is that we reprimand the child and we tell them that okay, this is not right, but the child does not have the tools or does not understand that if this is not right, what else is right. So it's important to show the child what is right. Open communication regarding rules and expectations, just like how we just talked about. And behavior management strategies. It is essential that we avoid punishment, especially corporal punishment, because it can actually increase the emotional dysregulation and feeling of threat in children, rather than reduce it. Punishment can be used in terms of cutting down TV time or not letting them, giving them a short timeout. But hitting children or giving them very evident punishment can make them feel threatened in a safe environment as home as well. One of the very important skill that parents need when they have a dysregulated child is de-escalation technique. So de-escalation of emotional crisis is important, and it is very important that we regulate ourselves first before dealing with the child. So it is important because the child is also perceiving what we are doing when they are already feeling dysregulated. So in such situation, if our high voice is also very high or very strong, we are also shouting with them, what we are doing is that we are not regulating the child, we are dysregulating them even more. So it is important that we lower our voice, have very slow moments so that they do not feel any threat, use few words or stay silent for some time, match their energy in a way that, let them know that I'm there for you, I hear you, let's take some time. In certain children, offering a sensory tool, having a sensory tool like maybe a comfortable blanket or a toy. Some kids use fidget spinner or a squishy toy, which helps them, regulate them from the body. Use rhythmic exercises such as taking the child in the lap, rocking them, doing inhale, exhale with them, and giving them a safe space to have a outlet of anger or outburst. So these are very important that we use it when the child is dysregulating, and also practice when the child is in a good space, talking to them in this way so that they feel the consistency of your presence and your safe environment throughout. So if the environment is not safe throughout and you practice this only when the child is dysregulating, it may not work because they are not able to predict what is happening at that moment. So it's important that this is something that we also do when the child is not at a stressful situation. Secondly, one of the few factors that we can teach the child is self-regulation. For self-regulation, it is important first to help the child identify what emotions they are experiencing and in which state of that emotion are they in. So this is a zone of self-regulation chart, which is very effective when we are helping the child first verbalize their feelings. So it's divided into four colors: blue, green, yellow, red, and each color has a category of feeling, such as blue is definitely complete underwhelming. Red is completely overwhelming. Green is where the child is in a good state. Yellow is when they are starting to feel a certain sense of loss of control or frustration, which might then eventually get into red. So our work will mostly happen when the child is in yellow or in between green and blue. So it's important that we practice these charts with children and help them identify what emotions they are experiencing. If you remember, I have also shown a wheel in the beginning of the slide, feeling wheel. We can also help them identify emotions from that as well, but that is probably will be more helpful with children, a little older children above 12, 13. Another way of helping children talk about their feelings is using a feeling thermometer, which is very effective in telling them, helping them understand which state of anger or, upset or dysregulated feeling they are at. And we can help them even before they dysregulate completely. And probably we need to start working in their in techniques of grounding, self-soothing, etc., when they are around the orange area. So the child will be taught that, when you are in this area, you can practice this certain methods. So these methods may look like, you know, soothing lights, having something to touch, that they feel comfortable with, having comforting sounds, smell, taste, giving them something to drink or eat, which they can enjoy by themselves. At the same time, we can also use certain anger outlet techniques such as ripping paper, scribbling, or using a pillow to hit on, etc. One of the this is a very interesting way of self dysregulation uh, for parents, where the parents can use these few techniques. That is, first, to co-regulate, help the child calm down by staying calm yourself. Avoid personalizing, remembering that the child is not this is not a reflection of your parenting, like I mentioned in the beginning, that your child is not doing this on purpose. It is a struggle that they are experiencing. Looking at the root cause, which we have already discussed, the triggers that we have spoken about: internal triggers, external triggers, sensory triggers, etc. Then model coping strategies, demonstrate how they can probably deal with the situation. If the child is experiencing fear, what are the ways the child can deal with fear in general? Doing certain positive affirmations in general, or soothing, uh, physically soothing experience, taking deep breaths, etc. And support and reinforce, mainly when the child is showing certain self-regulatory techniques. Suppose the child is starting to feel angry, and once the child shows that, where he just goes and hit the pillow, or the child is saying that this is making me very angry, we have to remember to reinforce that behavior, because that is how we will strengthen this alternative behavior. So these are few techniques which will be helpful when we are practicing in management of emotional dysregulation. In the end, it is, I would like to mention that emotional dysregulation in children arises from a combination of neurological differences, sensory sensitivities, social communication challenges, and internal factors like anxiety and environmental influences. So, it's important that we do not label the child as bad or naughty, being disrespectful, etc., because we need to remember that the child is not doing this intentionally, and it is very, very important to support them through it. Thank you. We can take questions now if you have any.
You can share the questions in the chat box or unmute yourself and share.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, hello.
When the clinical support is needed?
Okay, so that is your question. When do we need clinical support?
Yeah.
Okay, so when you feel that it is very difficult for you to manage it yourselves, or certain behaviors are very frequent, and the duration is also very long. Suppose if you are every time the child is going out or going to school, there is an emotional outburst, or when they are going to have food, there is an emotional outburst. So if you feel like the frequency duration is unmanageable at home, then you can say that clinical support is required.
Okay.
We also have a response.
Mm.
My son, likewise, until interested, doesn't sit to study. Even though he sits, he makes excuses to skip saying something. Again, he yells when overjoyed or imitates the noises he finds in comic books or while watching a movie clip. He also loves to play with hands, imitating a motorbike or dinosaur.
One second, I'm reading it. Son, like, until interested, doesn't sit when you want to. Okay. So this is a question given by Sirisha, right? So, can I ask if you have done any assessment on the child, or if you have taken the child to any, psychologist for checking of this behavior?
Hello.
Hello, yes.
Good evening, ma'am. Actually, it's my son who behaves like that.
Okay. Yeah.
They say they had kept him in the category of very. Recently, I did not do assessment, but previously, when I did, they say that it has a spectrum, ADHD spectrum.
Okay.
1 second, 2 seconds, he will focus on something he's doing, and next he gazes
Mm.
into something like this. He's immersed in his own thinking. What
Hmm.
things like
Right.
likewise. I again call him repeatedly, what were you doing, Beta? What are you doing? Please focus. Like that, I try to bring him down.
Makes sense. Right. So the symptoms that you have mentioned here are definitely consistent with neurodivergent behavior, ADHD mostly. So, emotional dysregulation might not be playing a very active role here. So it's important that maybe you can get an assessment done, or if a diagnosis is required, and certain behavioral management might be required in this situation.
Thank you. So what he does is, suppose if he wants to do anything, if he gets promised to do anything and it not in it, he cannot accept any negative thing like that. What happens to him?
Okay.
Things or any negative things, he's immediately frustrated. He folds his hands and he isolates himself, goes into a separate room like that.
Okay. All right. So he finds it difficult when you say no for something. Is that what, am I getting it right?
Yeah, suppose if something, suppose if he wants to go outside to a park today for somehow, some or the other
Yeah.
reason, he's unable to make it. Some
Yes.
priority comes in the families. Like this, he is unable to accept the thing. Once if you say anything to him, it's needed to done.
Right.
Otherwise, he shows that kind of tantrum. He goes away immediately frustrated, and into another room, he isolates himself.
Okay, so there is definitely the possibility of low frustration tolerance here. So when there is a difficulty or a challenge to their goal, they are not able to take it in, right? So having a consistent routine or telling them what to expect when a situation like this arise definitely will help them in further regulation and teaching them certain helping them identify that what you are feeling right now, it is because of this situation. This will also help the child become more aware of their experiences or emotional states. Akila ma'am, if you want to contribute, please go ahead into this.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Shrisha, I think your question also surrounds what to do and how to deal with him when he's behaving like this, right? So one of the things that you can do, like very beautifully Diksha presented, was the feelings thermometer, and help him to understand where his emotions are at that particular time, which zone is it, and then talk about options. Most often, when somebody has ADHD, they often don't know other ways to behave, right? So, like Diksha rightly pointed out, if we're quick to tell them, don't do this, but then we don't equip them with the skills of what to do if I don't do this, right? What else can I do? So, maybe having some kind of a conversation around when he's angry, when he's frustrated, how can he talk to you about it? What can he do to show you that this is how he's feeling or this is what he's going through, will help him to communicate his emotions better. So, a lot of times the dysregulation is expressed as a behavior because they don't know A, what they're feeling, and B, they don't know what to recognize the signs as feelings. Instead, they then recognize it as a discomfort, and then it shows as a behavior. So, if you can help them to identify the signs, that's where maybe a pictorial representation or describing how their stomach feels when they're angry, or their palpitations or sweat or whatever it is, physical symptoms, and then the thoughts in their mind, and then so they're aware of how they're feeling, first step. Then the next step could be, what can he do instead of what you're objecting to, like him shouting or sitting in a place quietly? What else can he do to express himself? I think a combination of that would really equip him with the skills to be able to express his emotions better. I think there's one more in the chat box, Riddhi.
Yes. So there's a question. Can you please educate us on measures of clinical intervention?
Uh, Measures of clinical intervention, meaning like what are the clinical interventions available? Is that what the question is? In terms of emotional dysregulation?
Am I
Okay.
somebody?
Yeah. So if the child with emotional dysregulation is referred for clinical intervention, then definitely there are a different, eclectic approach that we will be taking. One will definitely be behavior management techniques, and one other one will be distress tolerance techniques, where the child will be given taught what like ma'am said, identification of feelings, what this feeling actually are the underlying communication of, why is it happening, educating the child, bringing the awareness into the child about what they are experiencing and how they can probably verbalize it to the child, how the child can learn to verbalize it in a more adaptive manner. Secondly, we will be also using different techniques of, self regulation, co-regulation, and helping the child understand what they can do when they are experiencing emotional distress in such situations. Secondly, emotional dysregulation can also be an factor of which of certain primary symptoms in a child, such as in if the child has ADHD, then it can be an byproduct of impulsivity. So because of impulsivity, they are experiencing constant criticism, not able to engage in goal directed behavior, because of which there could be emotional dysregulation. So sometimes helping the child, or targeting the main symptom, can also help in reducing emotional dysregulation. Ma'am, you would like to add anything?
No, I think you've covered quite a bit.
Okay.
Thank you. The one other thing that we could do is also to improve the functioning of the frontal lobes, which is the executive functions, because that will then prevent the amygdala hijack from becoming a constant feature. So the connection between the amygdala and the frontal lobes is through the hypothalamus and the thalamus. And if we have to keep that circulation constant and in a very systematic manner, we need to strengthen the frontal lobe functions, which is through strengthening the executive functions. So that is yet another way of dealing with emotional regulation. So rather than focusing on the dysregulation, which is what the behavioral technique would look at, we would look at regulating the emotions by strengthening the executive functions.
So, ma'am, by saying the executive functions training, are you talking about the cognitive therapy
Yes.
in CBT?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, no, not CBT. CBT is one way to achieve that.
Mm-hmm.
But so CBT involves you being aware of your thoughts and the association of thoughts and emotions, and
Mm-hmm.
that then translating to how you express it via behavior, right? So
Right.
that's the trifecta that the CBT technique works on. But the
Mm-hmm.
executive function training does not talk of connecting your thoughts and emotions. For very
Okay.
young children, oftentimes they may not be aware of, I am angry right now, or that, I'm angry because, or I'm jealous, or, the subtleties of those, and they're not aware of the thoughts that they have, which is a
Okay.
crucial component for a CBT to be actually successful, largely because they don't have the cognitive sophistication of an adult.
Okay.
Therefore, training them to improve their impulsive control, their working memory, their attention, and their mental flexibility is done through repetitive exercises. It's like muscle building in your brain.
Okay. Okay.
So
Okay.
that is a completely sort of different technique, which
Mhm.
can be done, and then it has the same impact on this regulation through CBT.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
We have one more question from Preeti Shetty. How can we help increase kids' concentration and focus at home? Any suggestions like particular exercises or any activity that will help them?
Definitely, the cognitive training activities are really helpful. And if you are looking at specific difficulty, then a lot of attention related activities. So, depending on the child's age, we have different activities that they can do, such as grain sorting, or bead sorting, where or giving them certain activities such as number cancellation, color cancellation, which the child can practice themselves within their home itself. Now if you are facing difficulties on a more disorder level, then we might have to look at more structured cognitive training activities, which ma'am which we deal with in at Samvid itself. Ma'am has an app called Rewire, which we when given to when given to children or adults, we have seen tremendous improvement in their cognitive abilities such as attention as well.
Is there any more questions? Yes, Joshel, can you go ahead?
Yeah, I have a question related to therapy. So can a therapist who works on the child with behavior management also work on the executive functioning training at the same time, or there needs to be a bifurcation depending on how adult therapy works? Like the schools are different. So is it the same with child therapy as well? And if yes, then how does one go about it? Like, do we first work on transitioning them into the session and then working on cognitive exercises for them?
One of the factors that we need to consider here is the expertise of the therapist. If they have the expertise in cognitive training, definitely things can go simultaneously. And but the sessions of cognitive training and behavior management looks quite different. In when we are looking at sessions of behavior management, it can look like once in a week, but when we are doing cognitive training, it's more rigorous, probably thrice in a week, and it's more committed and a different process. So yeah, I mean, think ma'am will be the best person to give this answer, but this is from my side.
Yeah, very beautifully and aptly described. The processes can go simultaneously, but what we find is that when the cognitive training is done first, then it takes care of most of the impulse control, impulsivity, and inflexibility related issues. And then you can talk about the cognitive or CBT therapy based interventions, which become more effective because the child is more receptive to these inputs. So we do find that starting with a cognitive training first, and then as the cognition improves, then move on to a CBT technique works. However, I would like to highlight at this point that the orientation of the therapist in these two situations is very, very different. With regard to training and the frequency and intensity, Diksha has already beautifully explained it. There's one more angle to it, the role that the therapist plays in these sessions, right? Riddhi can also pitch in because she has experienced this firsthand and quite recently too. When you're doing cognitive training, you need not be a therapist who is accepting of all the behaviors and non-judgmental of the child's behaviors, and you therefore can take on a fairly rigid stand or maybe do limit setting. However, when you are a therapist, then you are a lot more accepting of the child's behaviors during the session, and you approach it and deal with it in a different way. So the limit setting, as I would call it, the way we approach it in a cognitive session can be different and quite significantly different from the way we approach limit setting in a therapeutic setting. While as therapists, we may be trained to handle both effectively, the child might find it confusing. Why are you this way in one session and why are you another way in another session? And for some children, particularly very young children, this switch, they find it very difficult to adapt to, and they prefer one or the other mode of intervention with you. So, as a rule of thumb, we try to avoid having the therapist also double up as a person who does the cognitive training, especially when you're actively involved in cognitive training. Using an app and monitoring the app is one thing, but actually delivering the activities manually is another thing. So we typically try and avoid doing both, unless the child is able to cope. But there is no harm in having two therapists simultaneously working on the two, because they're actually complementary processes and they work very well.
Correct.
I have a follow-up question, if that's
Sure,
okay.
sure.
So there's this widespread label that's usually used in clinic settings about working on behavior,
Mhm.
where the child, like when they come in, some children are able to sit and able to comprehend what you're trying to say, but there are some children who would not be able to understand, are always on the run. Sensory seeking is high. So sensory seeking, usually they'll recommend for an OT, but a behavior therapist job or a psychologist job in that case, would that would we be first only focusing on the behavior where they transit into just sitting? Is sitting and understanding one of the prerequisites of cognitive therapy and CBT as well? Like CBT for sure, but can cognitive training or cognitive concepts be built simultaneously when you're working on the behavior that is, I don't want to call it sitting tolerance according to ABA, but in terms of like them coming towards us to, whatever interests them to work. Can that work simultaneously?
Diksha, do you want to take that?
No, ma'am, you please go ahead.
Okay. All right. So I would go ahead and call it sitting tolerance. And yes, sitting tolerance is very important. And in CBT, that's sort of a given, and you build on that. If the child is not able to sustain his or her attention for that 40-minute or 1 hour session, then the session actually it's not possible for us to have the session. So that's one of the prerequisites. But in a cognitive training session, that becomes our aim to improve the sitting tolerance. So we may have a child who can do a given activity for 5 minutes, and then our aim in the first few sessions would be to increase that to maybe 15 minutes, depending on the age of the child and then the diagnostic category. And once that's done, then from there to make it a little bit more, and then to follow through with instructions. So following single instructions, to following two-stage instructions, to following multi-staged instructions. So it's woven into the intervention program, and we build. So maybe initially a session looks like it's only for 15 minutes, and then a break, and then another 15 minutes. Whereas CBT, you cannot have that. And therefore, then you may want to work with a parent, 15 minutes with the child, and the remaining session with the parent, who can then do the same program at home. But for a cognitive training, we can start with shorter sessions. And as the sitting tolerance and the ability to follow instructions improves, then we increase the duration in the session. And when the child is ready to be able to follow instructions, then the next step is to participate in the session by communicating effectively. Once that is achieved, then the CBT will beautifully fit in to this framework. I hope that has answered your question.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Do we have any more questions? Okay. So to conclude, I just want to thank you so much for the presentation, ma'am. It was really enriching and insightful, and we really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your expertise with us. And it's such a relevant and important topic for the parents and the caregivers. And I'm sure this presentation has offered us a glimpse into understanding the emotional expression and the regulation of children, and helped us understand how we can empathize with these children better. And I really want to thank everybody who has participated in the GreyMatters series. Your participation makes it more fruitful. And I'm really glad that you could join us today. About the upcoming month, we will be having a continuation on the topics that we have been discussing so far, and we'll be also be covering the next topic, which is digital habits in childhood, helping children thrive beyond the screen. So we see that a lot of children are hooked onto the screens these days. So this topic will offer us an insight into how we can help them thrive beyond the screen. So I hope all of you could join us on the 27th of June, which is a Friday, for the same. And thank you so much to Diksha ma'am, and thank you so much for everybody who has participated. I hope we can call it today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the session. Just as a concluding note, I think digital hooking is not just limited to children nowadays, I believe. So we need, so it's a universal phenomenon right now, right? I just wanted to leave that note.
Yeah. Yeah, I realize that. So we can go beyond children as well. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you so
ma'am.
much, Brad.
Thank you, Diksha. Nice session.
Thank you.